Cloud. Screen. Okay, so this chapter is actually an integrated physiology chapter, which is actually kind of cool because it integrates multiple organ systems at the same time. Okay, and these things actually are actually controlled by multiple organs, fluid and electrolyte imbalance. Okay, so water balance. Okay. So we'll talk through all these topics, especially acid base. Okay. Okay, so the body uses several systems for excreting ions in water. Okay, the primary route is the kidney, and the best way to modify things is usually the kidney. Some water ions are lost in feces and sweat, so there's ions in feces, and also if you sweat, I'm sure if you taste sweat, you realize there's some amount of salt there. Okay, the lungs lose water and bicarbonate via breathing out CO2. Thirst and craving for salt are behavioral mechanisms. Okay, so we can talk about that. Okay. Okay, so multiple systems integrate fluid and electrolyte balance. The respiratory and cardiovascular systems are rapid response systems, but they can't fix everything. They're the rapid change. The kidneys are the slow change. Okay, but so think about it this way: the respiratory and cardiovascular is a band-aid. Okay, the kidneys are healed. So it's a little different. Okay. Yeah. So there's an integrated response to blood volume and pressure. First of all, if there's less volume, there's less pressure. Okay, so the volume receptors in atria and carotid and aortic receptors, pressure receptors trigger. Okay, so cardiovascular system. Okay, so my question to you will be like, if your blood pressure drops, how will your cardiovascular system handle it? How will your kidneys handle it? Okay, something like that. Okay, so for the cardiovascular system, if there's decreased blood pressure, your heart is going to pump faster. Okay, increased cardiac output, cause vasoconstriction. So increased vasoconstriction, increased peripheral resistance, increased cardiac output. Okay. Your kidneys will conserve water to prevent any further loss. And we'll talk about how does that later. And then your behavior, it makes you thirsty. Okay. Okay. Increase in blood volume or increase in blood pressure. Okay. Cardiovascular system decreases output, causes vasodilation. Hopefully that decreases blood pressure. Okay. Your kidneys excrete salt in the urine, pee out salt, which decreases the ECF and ICF volume. Okay, so you'll see on this side, there is no behavior. You can't drink more water. You can't drink negative amounts of water. Okay, so there's a behavior to increase blood pressure, drinking more water. There's no behavior to decrease blood pressure. Okay. All right, so I'm sure you know this thing. This slide you just have to read. There's not much. There's nothing. And you can understand it through this image as well. Okay, so obviously your water balance has to be 0. So whatever you intake and you have to output on an average basis, right? Not obviously not day to day. So like one day I drink a lot more water, the next day I drink a lot less. But from day, like week to week, this is about 0. Okay. Okay. So the kidneys conserve volume. Okay. They cannot restore lost volume. So if you actually drop below this line here, you stop peeing. Okay, and that's really, really, really bad. Okay, so this line here, above that line, you have GFR. GFR, so glomerular filtration rate, the rate of glomerulus works. Can be altered, and we covered that in chapter 19. Okay, so the kidneys recycle the fluid. Okay, and some of it is lost through urine, and we can control the amount that's lost through urine, and we can regulate how much water we want to reabsorb. Okay, so we can alter the GFR to filter more or less, and then we can also change inside the kidney how to reabsorb more water if necessary. Okay, and we'll talk about mechanisms for that. Okay. So the osmolarity of the urine represents how much water is excreted in the urine. If it's very high osmolar, then there's a lot of salt. That means there's low concentration of water. That means you're trying to conserve water. Okay. If there's very low amount of salt, then there's very high amount of water, which means your body at this moment is not very concerned about preserving water. Okay. Preserving water is good when you're dehydrated, but it costs energy. So your body doesn't want to spend out energy to conserve water unless it needs to. Okay. All right. So we'll talk more about these in pictures a little bit. So here is the nephron. Okay. Talk about the function of the nephron. We'll get into a little bit more detail. Now we'll deal with salt. Okay. So your plasma is about 300 milliosmolar. Okay. So anything below that is less salty than the plasma. Anything above that is more salty than the plasma. Okay. One of the reasons why you have cortex and a medulla, and that's so important in anatomy, is that the medulla is so different. As you go lower and lower into the medulla, it becomes saltier and saltier and saltier. Okay. So most nephrons don't go very deep into it, but their jugular medullary nephrons do. Okay, and that's primarily what we're talking about in this example. Okay, so the proximal convoluted tubule matches the plasma because what goes into the proximal convoluted tubule is basically plasma. Okay, so here you go in, as you go down the loop of Henle, the descending loop of Henle allows only water to cross the membrane and not salt. Okay, so as it goes down, it becomes saltier and saltier as it goes down. So as you go down, you lose water consistently. Okay, you lose water. So it is saltier in the proximal convoluted tubule, or it is saltier in the loop of Henle. But as you go down further, it's even more salty in the renal medulla, so you lose more water. So as you go down, you constantly lose water. Okay, until you match the salinity of the bottom of the loop of Henle, which is about 1200 roughly. Okay, 4 times as salty as regular plasma. Okay. Okay, now you go up. Okay, you have this really salty solution that goes up. Okay, the ascending loop of Henle, okay, does not allow water to come through. Okay, but it does reabsorb ions. It's using energy to reabsorb ions. Okay, so as you reabsorb the ions, the water becomes more and more dilute. Okay, and by the very end, it actually ends up being less salty than plasma. Okay, and then it enters the distal convoluted tubule, and then it enters the like the collecting duct and you pee it out. Okay, so if you're drinking large amounts of water or adequate water, actually, what you'll end up doing is peeing out liquid that is less salty than plasma. Okay, you'll be closer to it'll be around 100, right? Typically about 100, you can possibly get to 50, but you're about 100, plasma is about 300, so you're much less salty than plasma, which is why they tell you, like, if you want, you can re-drink during this. Okay, not that you should. Okay, Dr. Moon does not think you should re-drink your urine, so please don't do that. Okay. Okay. So that is, everything is normal. Okay, you're drinking enough water. Your kidneys aren't stressed to try to conserve water. Okay, so notice that everything here is controlled by hormones, variable reabsorption of water and solids, permeability of water. So we'll talk about how we can modify that in the future. But for now, this is what the osmolarity does. Okay. Okay, so the first hormone we talked about is vasopressin. Okay, vasopressin, okay, or antidiuretic hormone. Okay, it acts as collecting ducts. Okay, it matches the urine concentration in the body's need. Okay, so what vasopressin does? Vasopressin stimulates aqua pouring insertion into the apical membrane with membrane recycling. Okay, aqua pouring, a hole that leaks water. Okay. Okay. Vasopressin is produced more during the day and less at night, which is why you pee less at night. Okay, and your morning pee is quite a bit more concentrated than all your other pee. Okay. Okay, so now let's just look at the collecting duct right here. Okay, so this right here is collecting duct. Okay, under normal conditions, this is under normal conditions. Okay, normal. Okay, under normal conditions, whatever comes out here goes straight down. Okay, and that's it. You pee out dilute urine. If you're thirsty, okay, your body, if you're dehydrated, your body makes vasopressin. So here is vasopressin. Okay, vasopressin causes aqua pourings to be inserted into collecting ducts. Okay, now the water can leak. Okay, and as you go down the collecting duct, you're also going down the renal medulla, Remember, the renal medulla that gets saltier and saltier and saltier. So as you go down the collecting duct, you lose more and more and more and more water to the renal medulla. And it goes into the blood vessels of the renal medulla, especially the vasa recta. Okay? And so that becomes more dilute. So now you are pumping water consistently back into your bloodstream from the collecting duct, which means you are peeing out a lot less. The urine becomes really concentrated, okay, and your blood gets more fluid back, okay. All right. Okay, so that's the job of vasopressin. Okay, it makes more aqua porings that allow water to pass through, and okay. Okay, so here is vasopressin. You change the epithelium, the insertion of aqua porins, increase water reabsorption. Okay. Okay. So the effect of plasma osmolarity on vasopressin secretion, you can see the more vasopressin, the saltier the plasma. Okay. Or the saltier the plasma, the more vasopressin is made. Okay. 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 So one of the most important concepts of the loop of Henle is something called a counter current multiplier. Counter current, you'll have two currents that flow in different directions. Okay, and they will be opposites in something, and you'll see here. Okay, so this is a simple one. Okay, so if the blood vessels are not close to each other, the warm blood comes in and you get constantly cooled off and cooled off. The cool blood, okay, is the heat is lost to the external environment all the way through, and so by end you end up with very cold blood. And so like we're talking something like seals and stuff like that in ice water. So you lose a lot of heat very quickly if these blood vessels are not close to each other. But if they are close to each other, okay, as blood travels down, it becomes cooler and cooler and cooler. As it travels up, however, the warmer blood is right next to it, so it will slowly heat up the blood. So you transfer the heat from this side to that side, and so you'll conserve heat that way. And just like conserving heat, you can conserve water that way. Okay, counter current multiplier. Okay. Okay. So here's the loop of Henle, and here's the vasa recta. Okay. So down, this side goes down, that side goes up. This side goes down, that side goes up. Counter current. Okay. So right here, these are all 300 milliosmolar, right? So 300 milliosmolar, 300 milliosmolar. As it goes down, this becomes saltier. Because this is saltier, this will leak more water to this side. Okay, that will make this less salty. Okay, this will become more salty. So now 600. Now 600 is more salty, but as it goes down, it's more salty here. So it will leak water from here to here. And this side will end up being less salty. So, and this side will end up being more salty. So as you go down, this side becomes more and more salty, this side becomes less and less salty. So I'm conserving salt and water, okay? Counter current multiplier or counter current exchange. Okay. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can understand this. Okay. Okay, so ingest salt, no change in volume. Okay, increase osmolarity. Okay, you're thirsty, you drink more water. Okay, you also trigger vasopressin to conserve water. Okay, so more water flow and eventually your osmolarity. And then what happens is you have too much water, and when you have too much water, you actually secrete out salt and water, and so you eventually dump out the salt. Okay. 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 The next hormone is aldosterone. Aldosterone controls sodium balance. Okay. So along with water. So salt always follows water. So aldosterone reabsorbs salt. Along with salt follows water. Okay. So low blood pressure stimulates aldosterone secretion. Okay. The decreased blood pressure stimulates angiotensin 2. Okay, so that's aldosterone. Okay, the aldosterone is the final player in something called the renin-angiotensin pathway. Okay, or RAS. Here, usually in other textbooks, is usually known as RAA. Okay, renin-angiotensin aldosterone pathway. Okay, your jugular and glomerular cells secrete an enzyme renin if blood pressure increases. So in your kidney, it measures blood pressure. If there is low blood pressure, it will secrete renin. Renin will convert angiotensin, or sorry, angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. ACE will convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will act on aldosterone. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's angiotensin 2. Okay. Common drugs, ACE inhibitors. Okay. ACE inhibitors block ACE from converting to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will stimulate vasoconstriction. So you block vasoconstriction, you have vasodilation, so you have a decrease in blood pressure. That's what ACE inhibitors do. Okay. Okay. So natural rennet peptides promote sodium and water excretion. Okay. Natriuresis, urinary sodium loss. Okay. So sodium is natrium. Okay. So ANP is produced in the atrial myocardial cells. Okay. When you have too much blood volume, your atria overfills. When your atria overfills, it produces ANP. ANP causes your body to get rid of sodium, and by getting rid of sodium, it gets rid of water. and so you pee out more than you normally would, so it reduces blood volume. Okay. Potassium. Okay, so osmolarity and volume can change independently and eat salt. When you eat salt, it doesn't change volume, it changes osmolarity. So if you eat salty foods and stuff, you change osmolarity without changing volume. Okay. Okay. So, dehydration can trigger homeostatic responses, the decrease in blood volume, pressure, and increase in osmolarity. And so the compensation involves the cardiovascular response, which is the constriction of the blood vessels to increase blood pressure. Okay, angiotensin 2 also increases blood pressure, vasopressin, and last but not least, thirst. Because ultimately, those mechanisms, those compensation mechanisms are not permanent. You eventually need to replace your water loss. Okay. Okay, so you should be able to understand this chart. Okay. Okay. So severe dehydration. Okay. Last but not least, acid base balance. Okay. Acid base balance. Okay. The normal pH of plasma is 7.38 to 7.42. It's a very narrow range. Anything beyond that causes problems. Okay. So we usually say it's between 7.35 and 7.45, but that's either answer is fine. Okay, so pH changes in pH disrupt proteins, and therefore its concentration is closely regulated. Okay, we need buffers. Okay, abnormal pH also affects the nervous system. Okay, because the pH determines the sodium potassium channels and the initial voltage. Okay, so when you have acidosis, the neurons become less excitable, which can cause CNS depression. In alkalosis, the neurons become hyper excitable, which can cause muscle tetanus. Okay. All right. Okay, acid input organic acid diet intermediates. So we can eat a lot of acidic things like one of the stupidest ways to put yourself into acidosis is to drink large amounts of lemonade. And that's been done by kids everywhere. Okay. But acid, there's very few bases, and most bases are fairly basic, like milk is slightly basic. But there are some really acidic things like lemonade, Coke, etc. Okay. 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 Under extraordinary conditions in transient crisis, the metabolic organic acid can increase ketoacids, and ketoacids continue ketoacidosis, and that is a side effect of diabetes. Okay, your body can't uptake sugar, so it starts burning fat. Fat, one of the byproducts of fat burning is acids. The acids can trigger ketoacidosis. Okay. The production of CO2 CO2 is also acid. It turns into carbonic acid in the blood. Okay. Okay. So pH input into the blood. Okay. So metabolism. Okay. And diet. So lactic acid, keto acid from lactic acid is from exercise. Keto acid is from um, fat metabolism. And then diet to be rich amino acids and fatty acids, and also just acid of some sort. Okay, and that can disrupt pH. The buffers. Okay, okay. This is H plus input. This is output. So you have two ways to output excess H plus. Okay, one through the kidneys and one through ventilation. Okay. Okay. The fast one is actually ventilation. The fast response is ventilation. The slow response is the kidneys. Okay. Okay. And the ventilation can compensate for pH disturbances. So hypoventilation, hyperventilation. Okay. Okay. So respiratory compensation for metabolic acidosis. Okay. So your body realizes the pH is too high. Sorry, the pH is too low. Sorry, pH low. The hydrogen levels are too high. That's what I was trying to say. Okay. Okay. They trigger the respiratory control centers in the medulla. It triggers the muscles of ventilation. It increases the rate and depth of breathing. So you start breathing heavier. Okay. When you start breathing heavier, you start getting rid of carbon dioxide. Remember, carbon dioxide is acid. So you're compensating by having too much metabolic acid by getting rid of carbonic acid. And so that will lower the plasma pH back to normal. But again, this is not healthy. You're breathing harder to compensate. Okay, and you see this in diabetics a lot. Okay, when diabetics are not taking the insulin or having an insulin crisis, what actually happens is their body stops taking sugar, they start burning fat, or they burn fat, they produce keto acids. And the keto acids build up in the bloodstream, and the way they one of the ways they compensate, it's not like sorry, they're not trying to compensate like manually. It's just something their brain is doing. They're getting to breathe harder, and you see that in their breathing. Okay. Okay. So that's the respiratory compensation. The slower way is renal compensation. Renal compensation, I am purposely dumping out H plus. Okay, I am reabsorbing the bicarb and dumping out H plus. Okay. Okay, so that's how I do it. Okay. So I reabsorb the bicarb, I dump out H plus. Okay, and also ammonia. Okay. Ammonia is the base, but NH4 plus. Okay, so I actually dump out the acid. Okay. All right. Okay, so really important side here, acid-base disturbances might be respiratory or metabolic. So respiratory acidosis is caused by hypoventilation. when you're not breathing enough. Okay, say you have too much alcohol to drink, drugs. Hypoventilation causes causes CO2 levels to increase, which causes pH to decrease. Okay. We'll talk about the respiratory first. Okay, so respiratory osmosis, hypoventilation. This should be hyperventilation. Okay, so that should be hyperventilation. When you hyperventilate, the partial pressure of CO2 decreases, the pH increases. Okay, so when you hyperventilate, one thing they get you to do is breathe into the paper bag. The paper bag traps your carbon dioxide, and you breathe it back in. So hopefully it increases your carbon dioxide levels back up, and you no longer hyperventilating. Okay. Okay. Metabolic acidosis. Okay. Dietary and metabolic input of H plus exceeds excretion. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. One, diabetes will cause metabolic acidosis because you're burning things that will end up making acid. Dietary acidosis you can get by eating too much acidic foods. Okay. Okay, the pH decreases. Metabolic alkalosis. Okay, the loss of H plus through excessive vomiting or excessive ingestion of bicarbonate and acids. Okay, Tums or alkalosis. Okay, when you vomit when you throw up your stomach contents. Your stomach content have a lot of acid. Okay, so you lose a lot of acid when you puke constantly. We're not talking like one, throwing up your dinner. We're talking constant vomiting. Can cause loss of H plus because you're literally throwing up acid. So your body is now basic, and so metabolic alkalosis. Okay. So okay. So put it another way. Okay. Okay. So this one. This one. Controls CO2 levels. Actually, I'm gonna come back to this idea in a second, but hold on to this thought. Okay, so renal and respiratory compensation can be moved the pH back to normal, but may not control the problem. The respiratory usually doesn't. It usually puts it back to normal, but usually doesn't fix the problem. The kidneys can't. Okay. Okay. So your kidneys control bicarb. Okay. Your lungs control CO2 levels. Okay. So the easy way to remember is Rome. R-O-M-E. Okay. Respiratory. Opposite. Metabolic. Equal. Okay. Okay. So respiratory is CO2. So if CO2 goes up, pH goes down. CO2 goes down, pH goes up. Okay, opposites. Okay. CO3 increases, goes up, pH goes up. HCO3 goes down, pH goes. Okay, metabolic, so equal, metabolic equal. Okay, okay. Hopefully that makes sense. I will see you guys in